Okie doke, you're on.
Nos Wylfa. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to one of my Facebook Lives. I've got a very special guest on with me tonight, Mark Salisbury, who is one of the trustees of the Nuclear Institute. And I'm really looking forward to Mark talking about his background, really, and why he's so passionate about nuclear, and particularly nuclear on Ynys Môn. Before I do, I'll give just a bit of a roundup of my last few days. I had a brilliant Freeport event on the island on Friday afternoon in Holyhead at the Stena Line. Kindly hosted an event, and we had all of the stakeholders there. We had the councillors, we had the lots of people that worked incredibly hard. All of the officers were there celebrating, and lots of people from across Anglesey came to celebrate. So that was excellent. On a Saturday, I supported the RNLI. They had their May Day car cleaning appeal in Holyhead. So my car is now gleaming. And this week is Wales Tourism Week, so you will see me bobbing in Prime Minister's questions tomorrow. I'll be talking about how important tourism is to Wales, and particularly Anglesey. I'll be talking about the significance of my tips bill and the Welsh Labour government's tourism tax. On Thursday, I'm going to Hinckley Sea. It's an annual visit to Hinckley. And EDF have actually been in touch with me today. They're looking forward to visiting the island. And then on Thursday evening, we've got some of the officers coming from Anglesey Council coming to London as part of the Freeport. Thank you. So looking forward to meeting up with them. On Friday, I'll be getting the train back home to Holyhead. And in the evening at the Shrub Bay Hotel, there's a Rotary Club fundraiser for charity with Robert Page and the Friends of South Stack, Dewi and Sue, have kindly invited me to join their table. On Saturday morning, I've got my second cost of living event up at the Dinorban Arms Hotel in Amloch. Big thank you to Veronica there. It's free if you'd like to come along. It's 10 until noon on Saturday. Absolutely everyone is welcome. And then Saturday afternoon, I'll be going to Beaumaris, and then hopefully going along to the Vintage rally at Mona Showground. We are due to vote tonight, so I do apologise if I have to duck out, but hopefully we'll be able to get things moving. Now, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Nos Wylfa, Virginia, thank you very much for having me. It's definitely not had as busy week as you've got planned, that's for sure. So I live in the northwest of the island. We moved here, oh goodness me, I'm not very good with dates, about 7-8 years ago, I think.
Right.
Family has always been in the Air Force, so a very strong connection with RAF Valley, or it feels. I wasn't able to go into the Air Force, unfortunately, when I left university, but I did some work experience with a company called Magnox down at Berkeley Centre in South Gloucestershire. And the first time I went round a nuclear plant, I was hooked. So from then on, I've worked on operating and new build nuclear power plants and lived around them for the last 20 odd years or so.
Excellent. And you're one of the first people that reached out to me. I do remember meeting you in Portcullis, and you showed me a little tiny piece of sort of a demonstration of sort of we were talking about nuclear waste.
Yes, a little fuel pellet.
Exactly. No, that was very kind of you. And you've been very instrumental in supporting the apprentices at Wylfa, haven't you? When I went down to see Hinckley last year, they were actually you had lots of high praise for you, Mark, in terms of you helping them find work. But it might be helpful to set the scene in terms of the history. There's a lot of people on this call that know the history, and there's a lot of people that don't know the history. And my dad worked at Wylfa, and one of the my manifesto commitments was to do everything that I could to get new nuclear to Wylfa. Whenever I go around the island, young people say to me they want to be able to stay in their community. It's important to them. The Welsh language is important to them. The best thing that I can do is to work hard to ensure that there's those good quality jobs, which is why I fought for Anglesey to have Freeport status, and which is why I've also campaigned for new nuclear at Wylfa. But if we could just set the scene in terms of the bit of the history there, Mark.
Sure. Well, the Magnox programme was a family of reactors that's indigenous to the UK, and the first one was opened by Her Majesty the Queen in 1956. Can you believe? All that time ago.
Wow, very special.
That was in the north of England, and Wylfa was the last of the Magnox reactors, both globally and in the UK. So it was started construction in the 1960s, and the first unit was operational in 1971. It's had a very long and very helpful life to the UK grid, and unfortunately shut down. Yes, history wasn't my strong point. 2012 or 2014, I think it's had a few life extensions before since then. In the 1980s, when Sizewell B was built, which is the first of an American design of reactor, built by Westinghouse, so we'll connect with that later in the story as well. The intention was to build 10 copies of Sizewell B, which is ideal to get the scale. The more you build of something, the cheaper it becomes. That was axed to 4, sadly. So that would have been Sizewell B, Hinkley Point and Wylfa B, and then a site at Druridge Bay in Northumberland. But sadly, when the electricity industry was privatised in '89, that was axed. So if you'll hear people refer to Wylfa B, that was the PWR project that was to be a copy of Sizewell B that sadly never went ahead. And then the site was nominated for new nuclear build back in 2007, I think. And it was eventually acquired by a consortium of 2 German utilities, E.ON and RWE, who formed Horizon Nuclear Power. And they were looking at either EPR or AP1000 to build at the site. In 2011, 2012, forgive me if the dates are slightly out, they sold it to Hitachi Limited of Japan. And so Hitachi bought the site and proposed the advanced boiling water reactor for the site there. Went through the permitting process. You mentioned the apprentices. So in one of my previous roles, I worked there. Very proud moment to get 33 fabulous local apprentices through, and lovely to see them thriving at Hinkley. So do give them our best when you see them.
I will.
Unfortunately, Hitachi suspended the project. Oh, goodness me, I forget that date. How ironic. The one that's closest, I forget the date that Hitachi suspended the project, and it's been sat waiting ever since.
That's right. That's right. And then in terms of the difference between the EPRs, the AP1000s, and the advanced boiling water reactors, what's the sort of difference between they're known as large gigawatt, aren't they? So, and SMRs would be smaller, but for these sort of gigawatt reactors, how would you differentiate the difference between these?
So they're normally split up. So large scale reactors in the 50s and 60s, every town had their own little coal-fired power plant or oil-fired or town gas plant. And in the late 60s, 70s, everything was brought together in large scale generation. So lots of big coal plants, lots of big oil-fired plants, and lots of big nuclear plants. So gigawatt scale comes from the fact that they could generate 1 to 2 gigawatts, depending on the plant. The UK went a different route for historical reasons. We built gas-cooled reactors such as Magnox, and the rest of the world built either a pressurized water reactor, a PWR, or a boiling water reactor, a BWR. So EPR and AP1000 are pressurized water reactors. They're similar to Sizewell B in Suffolk, which is currently our only civilian PWR, with Hinkley Point being built. An EPR is built by a French company now called Framatome. And the AP1000 is a similar plant, but a slightly different operating philosophy, and that's built by Westinghouse, which is the same group that built Sizewell B in Suffolk.
Excellent, excellent. And you talk about gigawatts. So the UK government's got a goal of having 24 gigawatt of energy from nuclear by 2050. And in order to deliver that, we've got the British Energy Security Strategy, which was announced this time last year, and Wylfa was specifically mentioned. And we've got together great British Nuclear, which is, you know, who that's headed up by a very, very special friend of ours, Gwen Parry-Jones, who went to primary school actually in Beaumaris. And so there's a lot of sort of pieces of the jigsaw. We've got experience in the UK in different in fission, in fusion, in terms of the fuel enrichment, and in terms of all these pieces sort of coming together with Great British Nuclear. And you talked about sort of having a strategy, and I think it's really important we have this fleet mentality, because of course with nuclear, it does take a lot of time and it is expensive. And what we've seen from EDF and the meetings I've had with EDF, going from Hinkley C to Sizewell C. There's a lot of learnings that we can have in that, and that will bring the cost down and also the time down. And so if we sort of look at the differences between fusion and fission.
So fission is it literally means splitting. So if you studied biology, and you'd have learned about binary fission, which is bacteria splitting. Nuclear fission is the splitting of a nucleus of an atom. And it's normally the very heavy, the very large elements that tend to undergo fission: uranium, plutonium, some of these elements that have an enormous nucleus that's quite unstable, and they tend to split and produce an enormous amount of energy. Fusion goes right to the other end of the scale, right to the other end of the periodic table. We have very, very light elements like hydrogen and helium, and they fuse together to create new elements. And in fusing, they also release a lot of energy as well. So fusion is just bringing together, fission is splitting. Fission is the really heavy atoms like uranium, plutonium, and fusion is the very light atoms, hydrogen and helium.
Brilliant, brilliant, thank you. And in terms of the why is Wylfa such a great site? Why does everyone say it's the best site, not only in the UK but probably in Europe? Why is it such a great site? Is it because of the location, the geology? Is it because we've had nuclear there before? Is it because the community appreciates the high quality jobs that nuclear brings? What is it that makes it so fantastic?
So it's really a combination of all of those. All the sites that are currently earmarked for new nuclear are adjacent to existing nuclear installations, and they were chosen in the early days because they had good access to cooling water, they had good bedrock and were geologically sound. We were able to build a transmission system to take the power away. They were far enough away from population, should there be an issue in the early days, but they were close enough that you could get the power to the population very easily. Nowadays, all of that is still true, but with the addition of the fact that we have a host population that is familiar with living next to a nuclear power station, that has got all the skills that you need to build and operate a nuclear power station. And so for that, Wylfa has all of those, and that's why it's seen by many as an excellent site for new nuclear.
Now, Mark, we need to say hello to a few people, lots of friends here. Ben Williams and Chris, hi there, Noswaitha. Myra Thomas, Myra's got some great questions that she has emailed in. She's said hi to Virginia and Mark. Kenneth Chalice Jones, hi Ken. Adrian Edwards, one of my very, very good friends. Good evening. Malcolm Collard, talking about Calder Hall. Phil Roper, hi Phil, good evening to you. Make It Your Business, Anna Smorn, and Trish Marshall. She says she spoke to me recently about a fair. She was at a craft fair. Her husband worked at Wylfa for 40 years before he retired, and we wouldn't have half the things we have got if it wasn't for it. Absolutely, Trish. Big vote of confidence there. JJ Clary, hi Virginia and Mark. Lorna here. Oh, Lorna, hi Lorna. Love meeting Lorna's girls the other Friday. They looked absolutely smashing for the coronation celebration at Kegilio Foundation School. So we've got some questions coming in. Make It Your Business says, what's the difference between a small and large reactor, please? I've heard both mentioned as possible for Wylfa. Now, I actually had a meeting with G Hitachi here in Westminster. They've just gone off to see the Treasury, and they're talking about having 16 small modular reactors at Wylfa. So perhaps, Mark, you could explain the difference between the small modular reactors and the larger reactors, both in terms of energy and gigawatt and cost and things like that.
Sure. So the large gigawatt reactors are traditionally what we call the traditional reactors. They're what came through from the 70s onwards, and they're typically built as we'd refer to it as stick built. So you bring all the concrete and mix it to site. You bring all the steel work and you erect it there. The later reactors that have come along, the EPR and particularly the AP1000, started to modularize some of that off-site and then bring it to site and construct it as modules. Small modular reactors take that one stage further. So they are much more modularized. That's probably not very good English, but they're modularized to a greater extent. And they are smaller in terms of output and footprint. And that has a A couple of benefits. If you look to finance a large nuclear power plant, that takes a lot of money. Takes a lot of money to build a small modular reactor as well. Takes a lot of money to build a wind farm. Takes a lot of money to build everything. Those are, in some cases, can be easier to finance. So they generally are a smaller scale in terms of output, but you can add more to the site. So you can build one and get one generating, and then while that's earning money, you can bring another one in.
Excellent. And we've got Felicity here. Hi, Felicity. She says, what an interesting discussion, and she likes it. Felicity, it was great to see you in the McDonald's in Holyhead last weekend. She's actually been doing a survey, not to do with me, but about nuclear. And Eliane Williams, evening all. Hi there. Thank you very much for joining us. You spoke, Mark, about financing, and I think there's been a lot of talk about Hinkley C being 9250 megawatt hour. And then if we get Sizewell C up and running with RAB financing, that will take that 9250 down to 89. And people talk about contracts for difference and what's that's done for the, we've got Morlice and Monesto on the island, and we've obviously also got solar. But we know the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So why does everyone talk about this megawatt hour cost? What does it actually mean to people's energy bills?
So it's a really good question, and it's one of those. It's a really complex field, and it can get really quite difficult. But if the electricity we use in our house, we tend to pay for in units, and that's generally a kilowatt hour. So a kilowatt is a unit of electricity. A kilowatt hour is using a kilowatt for an hour. So if you take a kettle and boiled it for an hour, you'd probably use 3 kilowatt hours of electricity, and that comes with a cost. Megawatt hour is simply a megawatt is 1,000 times, or 1,000 kilowatts gives you a megawatt, and 1,000 megawatts gives you a gigawatt, and so on. And again, they're time bound, so you have it for an hour. The different technologies cost have different costs. The costs for generating technologies include the cost to build it, includes cost to operate it. Certainly in terms of nuclear, it includes the cost to decommission it. And where something uses fuel like coal, gas, nuclear, it also includes the cost of the fuel. So all those costs go together to give you a price per megawatt hour that the station can generate. That varies. It varies between technologies. It varies between even different types of the same technology. So some wind farms might be more expensive than other wind farms because they may be built in more inaccessible or inhospitable seas. Nuclear plants, the first nuclear plant may cost more than the 10th nuclear plant as we learn and we get better. The same with anything. The more we do something, the better we get, and the price comes down. And we've seen that with wind farms, and we'll see that with nuclear. We just need to keep building more than one. And you mentioned about the efficiencies going from Sizewell to Hinkley. For your electricity bill, about a half of that cost is made up of the price of the power that's produced from the market. The rest of it's in things like transmission costs. It's in terms of tax, although that's actually a relatively small amount, and also in other distribution costs. But about half of it comes from that generating cost. If you look at normally the figures that grab the headline, so £92.50 a megawatt hour you mentioned for Hinkley, that's the price that's being guaranteed for the electricity from that plant for a certain period. Now, if you look at a wind farm, the first wind farm started off at £140 a megawatt hour. But as we've built more and more, we've learned how to do it. We've got better at doing it. And that price has come down to about £40 a megawatt hour. And the same is true of nuclear. So as we build more nuclear plants, the price will start to come down. And it's worth noting that if Sizewell C is built, not only will Sizewell C's price likely be lower, but Hinkley's price comes down to £89.50 a megawatt hour. So in recognition of that learning and bringing that cost down.
But I think it's important to know that you can't really compare like with nuclear with the like of wind farms, because of course it's not the wind isn't always blowing. So that price per megawatt hour reflects when it's actually up and running. And of course nuclear, apart from when you've got some of them are, when you've got maintenance, they're largely running all of the time, aren't they? So you've got that reliability, and we need that reliability and that consistency.
So that's a really good point. Yeah, so nuclear plants tend to run about 90% of the time. So it's called the capacity factor. So about 90% of the time. So you're paying, or the market is paying, in Hinkley's case, £92.50 or £89.50 a megawatt hour, 90% of the time. For a wind farm, they only generate approximately 40% of the time, as you say, given the wind and other factors. So you're only paying whatever that price is 40% of the time. The rest of the time, that has to be made up by another technology. In the UK, that's typically gas. And what we've seen with the invasion of Ukraine is the increase in the market price of gas, which has pushed up the electricity price, which has filtered through to our bills. So with more nuclear plants, or more plants that take away the reliance on gas, and the sweet spot is to get that right blend of nuclear and renewables, we can remove that influence on the electricity price from gas, and keep our bills stable, keep them manageable, and also keep them net zero as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned our energy security and also net zero. Now, currently around 16% of our base load is from nuclear, and we've got all but one of our nuclear power stations going offline within the next decade. If we compare that with the likes of France, who've got what percentage have they got their base load? It's huge, isn't it? They've got 80 odd nuclear plants. And in terms of the way we are, that's our base load. And then if we want to decarbonise the transport sector, that's obviously a much bigger pie. And it might be helpful to explain what base load is, and the importance of, for example, nuclear for hydrogen, if we're going to look at the transport sector.
Absolutely. So during the 24-hour period, I was going to say a day then, but it's actually a 24-hour period, electricity demand fluctuates quite significantly. So you can imagine the first things that you do when you wake up is turn on the light and go and put the kettle on, or go and put the oven on, or put a toaster on. So our electricity usage increases during the night, and then it drops as we go to work. We normally have a lunchtime peak, and then when you get home, you put the oven on and you put the lights on. Particularly in the winter, you'll see a big peak, and then at night time it drops, but it doesn't drop to zero, because we're still using energy for street lights. We have lots of fantastic shift workers who are still at work and using power. And of course, your home needs electricity to charge the electric vehicle, or keep the fridge or freezer on. That electricity that we always require is called base load. Anything above that we tend to call peaking or intermediate power. And so because we can't store electricity, there's no proven large-scale battery technology yet. We do store it in a form. So actually behind you here at Dinorwic, there is a way to be able to balance electricity. The National Grid have a really difficult job in terms of trying to instantly give you that power when you need it by instructing power stations to start.
So, and what's your fantastic app where people can see how much of our energy is coming from different sources and at different times of day? What's your great app?
So there's a couple of fantastic ones. This is
they're quite addictive, aren't they?
That they are. You're always screenshotting and look at what's happening today. So if you go on the internet, you can find Templar, as in the Knights, although I don't think it's any relation, Templar Grid Watch. There are also a couple of apps, National Grid ESO, and I think the other one is it I Am Take, I think. I'm just checking my phone now. This is how sad of me, but
okay,
I do have a couple.
So Adrian Edwards says, thank you for explaining things in a language even I can understand. That's a lovely message there. Edward Bingham says, hi Virginia, I'm currently in France constructing a large offshore wind farm. Come back, Edward, we need you to help with BP Mona and BP Morgan. Ken says, why do we talk wind and solar but rarely tidal? As an island, it would be ideal. Absolutely. We've got more lights in Monesto. Ken, you should come and have a tour. It's really fantastic. And Bernard Gentry says we need to get on with building this on Anglesey. Much needed jobs will be created. Now, Bernard makes an excellent comment there. And I know you've been very instrumental in terms of supporting some of the young apprentices. If we had large gigawatts at Wylfa, the likes of the AP1000s from Bechtel and Westinghouse, or the EPRs from EDF, that will be around sort of 8,000 construction jobs and around 800 maintenance jobs. What sort of jobs are we talking about here?
So this is the beauty, and it's similar for small reactors, or nuclear is similar.
Yeah,
so
an SMR will be at 800 people, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it's broadly the same. There's a few variations, but so for construction, that's everything from drivers to concrete pourers to scaffolders to metal workers to electricians to caterers to security teams to labourers. That there's a whole gambit of skills that we need there. And for operations, again, there's a number of people from maintenance to engineering to HR to communications to finance to legal to operations.
It's a huge supply chain. When I went down to see Hinckley, I mean, like their local butcher, you go into the canteen and like the local butcher's amazing. And then the local secondary college, and I know you know, working with colleague Menai, they've got that fantastic Horizon suite there. And I've been contacted by some of the teachers across the island. I had an excellent conversation with a physics teacher from the Holyhead High School today, in Kate Hope, in terms of, you know, working with the curriculum to make sure that these, you know, our young students have got the skills to take advantage of these jobs. We want these jobs to go to local people, and we want to make sure that they've got the skills to actually take them. So we've got to ask you about decommissioning and also nuclear waste. That sort of that comes up quite a lot. But I mean, the surveys that I've seen is there is support for nuclear right across the UK in all different demographics. I stood on a mandate to do everything I could to deliver new nuclear to Wylfa. I set up and I chair the nuclear delivery group. I chair the APPG, which is a cross-party group for small modular reactors. I'm regularly bringing nuclear companies around the island. I went to the States to see nuclear companies. I actually went to the US Embassy recently, and the head of nuclear is called Virginia as well, so very convenient. I'm meeting up with them next week, and I've championed nuclear having green taxonomy as well. But it might be helpful to talk about why we've got such a good track record in nuclear, in disposing of nuclear waste, and really what does it mean? You and I both live on Anglesey, and we're both trying to get a nuclear power station. So what does it fundamentally mean to the people on the island? So
in terms of, I'll tackle decommissioning first, and then nuclear waste. Apologies if you can hear the racket. The cat started meowing.
What's your cat called?
Well, I've got Max, who's sat here watching me intently, and then Archie, who's not impressed that Max is sat here watching me. So apologies if he starts meowing. So in terms of decommissioning, that's the removal of fuel, and then the decommissioning, dismantling and demolition of the plant at the end, and returning it ultimately to a greenfield state. If that's what you want, most are returned to a brownfield state and reused for building new power stations. Now, the UK Magnox plants take a little longer to decommission than the newer light water reactors, the PWRs and the BWRs, but that is essentially what decommissioning means. Before any new nuclear power station can be built in the UK, it has to have a couple of things with it. One is a decommissioning and waste management plan. So that is technically, how are you going to deal with the waste and how are you going to decommission it? The second one is a funding, oh dear, the A escapes me. It's either allocation, but it's a funding plan. How are you going to pay for that decommissioning and waste management plan? And then you need to have the funding arrangements in place.
We're voting, Mark, but I'm literally, let's just spend 2 minutes, because I know we're good. So can we just talk about the waste? Can we, because I know there are people on the island that worry about that, and just briefly about pylons, and then I need to put my trainers on.
Absolutely, yeah, sorry, I won't keep you. I'll give you the really quick elevator pitch.
I've got 8 minutes to get to the chamber, but yeah.
So there's 3 types of waste. There is low-level waste, and that comprises about 90% of nuclear waste in the UK. That's typically made of things of gloves, paper, and things that you can't prove are not radioactive, but they're contaminated to a very small degree. They can be crushed, incinerated, size reduced, and they're stored at a low-level waste repository near Cumbria. Intermediate level waste is waste that's a little bit more active, and that's stored on site pending a repository. And then we've got spent fuel. So if you were looking at the spent fuel from a large scale plant, you're probably looking about the area when it's finished generating for most of Wales for 60 years, that would occupy the size of a tennis court. We can actually recycle that fuel. We don't at the moment. A lot of people have these visions of green luminous goo. It's not. It's sort of steel, it's concrete, it's ceramic material, so it's immobile, it's not going to move anywhere. And one of my older stats, it may have moved on a bit, but since the 1950s, from nuclear power generation, nuclear weapons research and industry, we've got about 5 Albert Halls worth of nuclear waste in the UK, of which 90% is this low-level waste. When you consider that the UK generally produce about 1 Albert Hall worth of domestic waste a year, it puts that into perspective, and this is from the 50s. It's all responsibly looked after and treated and stored, and it's all paid for in the price of the electricity that comes from a nuclear plant. And it's quite safe. As you say, we've lived near it for
exactly. And then last question from Murray Thomas, who's a real fan of nuclear. I mean, she really wants to know, why can't we just have nuclear? Why do we need all this other stuff, renewables? And
so technically you could just build a system that uses nuclear power stations. France used to have 80% of their power coming from nuclear, but as with everything in life, you need a blend of everything. It's not good to put all your eggs in one basket, as much as I would love to see that as a Nuclear Institute trustee. It's not a good thing to put all your eggs in one basket. So having a real blend, particularly of nuclear and renewables, will get bills down. It'll keep us net zero, and it'll make sure we've got a real security of our energy supply.
That's great, lovely. And Trish talks about Rolls-Royce SMRs. They're quite small, yes, they are. And they're about sort of like 0.5 gigawatt, Trish, versus sort of between 1 and 2 for large gigawatt. And then we've got Justy Williams, who said about my thoughts on Lonlas, the campaign to open up for disused railway for cycling and walking. A great question there. I had a meeting with the Lonlas team last Wednesday. I also met with the Transport for Wales and Network Rail. I'm not known for sitting on the fence, and I wanted to get the facts. I put in a Restoring Your Railway Ideas Fund, and we've had some research to work out how much it would cost for trains on the track, and then also for the multi-use path. And I should hopefully be hearing from the minister shortly. But Lonlas, they had a fantastic action day last Saturday, and I really think that this is a huge asset for the island, and we need to get together and have a grown-up conversation. I'm doing everything I can to get the facts so that I can actually support that conversation actually happening. But Justy, thank you so much for that excellent question. I'm going to leave everybody now. Thank you, Mark. You've been a brilliant guest. And thank you everybody for joining. If anyone's got any questions, what's a really good website for them to go to?
You can send them into nuclearinst.com, inst.com, and you'll find some answers there and lots of links to plenty of places where you can get information.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. I look forward to seeing lots of you over the weekend, either at my cost of living fair up at the Glenorvan Arms Hotel, or at the Vintage Rally near Gerwin. And Mark, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining.